My name is Emma, I'm 33, and I exposed my sister for marrying my ex-boyfriend for his inheritance at their wedding. Before I tell you exactly how the whole thing blew up in their faces, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. It all started with a piece of thick, cream-colored cardstock in my mailbox. An invitation. For 3 years, I had built a wall around the part of my heart that my sister, Olivia, and my ex-boyfriend, Jake, had shattered. It was a fortress, built brick by brick with long hours at work, new friendships, and a therapist who patiently helped me reclaim my own worth. And now, with a single piece of paper, they were trying to tear it all down. They weren't just inviting me to a wedding, they were sending me a ticket to the front row of their victory parade. On the invitation, in a swirling, obnoxious gold font that screamed new money, was a handwritten note from Olivia herself. "Hope you can be there to celebrate our happiness," it read. I felt a bitter, hollow laugh escape my lips. Happiness. The audacity was breathtaking. The phone rang almost immediately, a perfectly timed assault. It was my mother, her voice laced with that familiar, strange sweetness she only used when she was about to manipulate me. "Emma, darling. You got the invitation, I hope? You simply have to come. Your absence will make people talk, you know how they are." The follow-up call from my father an hour later was less subtle. It was a threat, plain and simple, delivered with the blunt force he always favored. "I've done everything for you girls. This is not a request. If you don't go, don't consider me your father anymore." For a long moment, I considered the easy way out. Throw the invitation in the trash, block their numbers, and pour a large glass of wine. Just let the fortress stand. But then, staring at their names entwined on that card, something shifted inside me. The grief I had buried for 3 years wasn't grief anymore. It had fossilized into something harder, colder. This wasn't an obligation. It was an opportunity. It was a stage. I picked up the phone and called my mother back, my voice calm, almost chillingly so. "You're right, Mom. I'll be there. I wouldn't miss my little sister's big day for the world. After all, I owe them a proper wedding speech." A slow, cold smile spread across my face. A plan was beginning to form. To understand why I did what I did, you have to understand what they took from me, what they built their happiness on. Jake and I were together for 3 years. He was handsome, charming, the heir to the Thornton real estate empire. I thought I'd build a life with him. But I wasn't just his girlfriend, I was his silent, uncredited partner. I'm an architect, a good one, and I poured my talent into his family's business. I remember the Lakeside Condos project, a deal that was floundering. The initial designs were uninspired, and the investors were getting cold feet. I spent 3 weeks, fueled by coffee and my love for him, completely redesigning the entire complex from the ground up. I created a stunning, modern design with open-concept living spaces and waterfront views for every unit. I built the 3D models, prepared the presentation, and coached Jake on how to sell it. He presented my work as his own. The deal, worth tens of millions, was a massive success. I remember him kissing me that night, whispering, "We did it, babe." We. That word felt like a promise then. Now, it just tastes like poison. I did it all for free, for us, for a future I believed we were building together. Of course, I ignored the red flags. The way he'd angle his phone away from me when a text came in, the late nights at the office that became more frequent, especially after I introduced him to my family. My best friend, Rachel, saw it all with painful clarity. "He's hiding something, Em," she'd warned me over brunch one Sunday. "No one is that busy, and no one guards their phone like it's the nuclear codes unless they have something to hide." I'd brushed it off, blinded by love and the future I was so sure of. "You're being paranoid," I told her. "He's just dedicated." The end came at a family barbecue, one of those sticky, humid summer afternoons that feel heavy with dread. Olivia had practically begged me to bring Jake. "I just want to get to know him better. He's so wonderful, she'd chirped, batting her eyelashes. I should have known. I noticed Jake and Olivia had both disappeared for an unnervingly long time. A sick, coiling feeling started in my stomach. I told myself I was being silly, but I went looking for them anyway. I found them in the living room, the one my parents kept for special occasions. It wasn't a quick, stolen kiss. It was intimate, familiar, a scene from a life they were already living behind my back. The way he was looking at her, his hand on the small of her back, the way her head was tilted up towards his, it was a portrait of betrayal. When they saw me standing in the doorway, there was no shame, no apology. Just a cold, hard defiance that knocked the air from my lungs. We couldn't fight it, Emma, Olivia said, her voice dripping with a fake, theatrical sincerity. We're soulmates. Soulmates. She used that word while my heart was breaking in front of her. Jake just stood there, looking at me as if I were a stranger who had wandered into the wrong house, an inconvenience. They confessed they'd been seeing each other for 6 months, ever since the day I first introduced them. The betrayal was so profound, it felt like the ground had split open beneath me. I drove home in a blur of tears, my car swerving as I struggled to see the road through the flood of my own sorrow. The first person I called was Rachel. She didn't say, "I told you so." She was just at my door in 20 minutes with a bottle of wine and a box of tissues, holding me as I fell apart. When I finally found the strength to tell my parents, hoping for some comfort, some validation of my pain, the second betrayal hit. And it was almost worse than the first. I sat them down in that same living room, my voice shaking as I recounted the story. My father just sighed, a deep, weary sigh of disappointment, in me. Well, Emma, Jake is a good provider. He comes from a good family. You should be happy for your sister. My mother's words were a knife, twisted with surgical precision. Olivia is more sensitive than you are, she said, as if that explained and excused everything. She's always been the fragile one. She needs a strong man like Jake to take care of her. You're the strong one, Emma. You'll be fine. They weren't just dismissing my pain, they were justifying the actions of the two people who had destroyed me. My own parents chose my backstabbing sister over me, framing her as a damsel in distress and me as the cold, unfeeling obstacle to her happiness. The only person in my entire family who stood up for me was my cousin, Michael. He got into a screaming match with my father, calling them out for their blatant, lifelong favoritism. It didn't matter. The lines had been drawn. I was utterly, completely alone. So, when that wedding invitation arrived 3 years later, it wasn't just a piece of paper. It was a summons from the very people who had exiled me, a command performance. My initial response was a hard, unequivocal no. I told my parents I wouldn't be attending, that I had a prior commitment to my own sanity. That's when the campaign began. It was a full-on assault. Constant phone calls at all hours, guilt-tripping text messages that filled my screen. My mother even showed up at my office one afternoon, creating an embarrassing scene in the lobby, pleading with me to do the right thing for the family. Think about the family's reputation, she'd pleaded, her eyes welling up with perfectly timed crocodile tears. What will people say when the bride's own sister isn't there? They'll think there's a problem. It was never about my feelings, my humiliation, or the years of pain. It was always about appearances, about maintaining the facade of a perfect, happy family. My father's approach was pure emotional blackmail. I've done everything for you girls, he'd said, his voice rising with indignation during one of our many tense phone calls. I paid for your education. This is the one thing I'm asking. If you can't do this for your family, then don't bother calling me your father. Through it all, my real family, my chosen family, had my back. Rachel was furious. You don't owe them a thing, Em. Not a single thing. Don't you dare let them bully you into this. Daniel, a wonderful colleague who had become my closest friend and a quiet pillar of support over the past 3 years, offered to run interference, to screen my calls, to do whatever it took. The turning point, the moment my passive resistance turned into active strategy, came during a late-night call with my cousin, Michael. "Be careful, Emma," he said, his voice low and urgent. "I overheard your mom talking to Olivia on the phone the other day." I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but they were loud. They were talking about how important this wedding was to impress the Thorntons. "Your mom mentioned something about a family trust and making sure Jake and Olivia were secure before Harold and Eleanor got any older." A cold chill went down my spine. A family trust. Suddenly, things started to click into place with sickening clarity. This wasn't just about love or betrayal. It was about money. A lot of money. The kind of money that makes people do monstrous things. I started digging. A few late-night, deep-dive online searches revealed that the Thornton family fortune was estimated to be around $50 million. More importantly, I found a Forbes article about Harold and Eleanor Thornton, Jake's parents. They were known for their strict moral standards and their philanthropic work. The article mentioned, in passing, how they had once publicly disinherited a nephew over a public scandal involving infidelity, cutting him off from the family's massive inheritance fund. I pulled up Olivia's social media. Her feed was a non-stop, curated parade of designer bags, lavish vacations to St. Bart's, and expensive dinners at Michelin-starred restaurants, all courtesy of Jake. It was a lifestyle far beyond what a part-time yoga instructor could afford. She wasn't just in love, she was auditioning for a role, and she was making sure the whole world saw her performance. The final piece of the puzzle, the smoking gun, fell into my lap with a series of pings from my phone. It was Olivia. Now that I had agreed to come to the wedding, she felt bold, invincible. "So glad you're coming," the first text read. "You'll finally get to see what you missed out on." Later that night, another series of messages came through. She was clearly drunk, her words sloppy and full of venomous pride. This time, they were voice notes. I pressed play, and my blood ran cold as her slurred voice filled the silence of my apartment. "You have no idea, Em," she gloated. "This wedding, it's everything. Jake's parents are making us jump through hoops to prove we're worthy. This whole thing is a show for them. Once we're married, the lawyer says the trust is locked in. $50 million, Emma. A house in the Hamptons, a yacht. I'll never have to work another day in my life." She let out a cackling, ugly laugh. "And you'll be stuck in your little apartment, designing buildings for other people." Guess I won in the end, didn't I? I didn't respond. I just sat there in the dark, my phone glowing in my hands. I saved every single voice note to the cloud. I took screenshots of her social media posts. I printed out the article about the Thornton family trust and highlighted the relevant sections. My grief had long since faded, replaced by a cold, hard, crystalline resolve. They wanted a show? I was going to give them the performance of a lifetime. With the evidence secured, I started preparing for war. I shared the entire plan with Rachel and Daniel over dinner. Their initial shock quickly turned to fierce, unwavering support. "We're going with you," Daniel said, his hand covering mine across the table. "You are not doing this alone." Rachel, ever the pragmatist, helped me pick out the perfect dress, a simple, elegant navy blue sheath. It was beautiful but understated. I wasn't there to outshine the bride in satin and lace. I was there to eclipse her with the truth. The day before the wedding, the final trap was set, just as I knew it would be. My mother called, her voice dripping with that cloying, fake sweetness. "Honey, your father and I were thinking, it would be so wonderful if you gave a speech at the reception. It would be the perfect chance to show everyone that our family is united and that you're truly happy for your sister." I saw the trap immediately, laid out as plain as day. They wanted to put me on the spot, to force me into a corner where I'd have to either lie through my teeth and sing Olivia's praises, cementing their false narrative, or make a scene and look like a bitter, jealous shrew. They underestimated me. They thought I was still the same girl who would swallow her pain to keep the peace. They had no idea who I had become. Of course, Mom, I said, my voice as smooth as glass. I'd be honored. I could almost hear her sigh of relief on the other end of the line, the self-satisfied sound of a manipulator who thinks they've won. She had no idea she had just handed me the microphone. The wedding was held at a lavish country club, the kind of place with sprawling green lawns and crystal chandeliers that cost more than my car. There were at least 200 guests, all dressed in their finest, a sea of pastel and polite smiles. As I walked in with Rachel and Daniel, a protective barrier on either side of me, I could feel the eyes on me, the whispers that followed in our wake. I was seated at the furthest table in the back, a deliberate, petty snub, placed with distant relatives I barely knew. From across the room, I could see Harold and Eleanor Thornton, Jake's parents, watching me with a look of intense, undisguised curiosity. They knew who I was. They just didn't know the whole story. Yet. The ceremony was a blur of white lace and hollow vows, a 30-minute performance of a love that didn't exist. At the reception, the champagne flowed freely. My parents were in their element, beaming and greeting guests, playing the part of the proud, loving parents of the bride. Finally, after the dinner plates were cleared, the moment came. The DJ announced it was time for speeches. After the best man gave a generic, forgettable toast, my mother caught my eye and gave me a pointed, triumphant nod. As I stood up, she leaned in and whispered, her breath smelling of expensive wine, "Say something nice, Emma." For me. I walked to the podium, my heart hammering against my ribs, but my hands were steady as I adjusted the microphone. I looked out at the sea of faces, my smug sister, looking like the cat that got the cream, my arrogant ex-boyfriend, preening in his tuxedo, my oblivious parents, smiling proudly, and the two people whose opinion was about to change everything. I took a deep breath. "Good evening, everyone," I began, my voice clear and strong, carrying through the suddenly silent room. They say that love should be built on a foundation of truth and honesty. So tonight, I want to talk about the truth. A nervous murmur rippled through the crowd. I saw Olivia shift uncomfortably in her seat, her perfect smile faltering for just a second. For 3 years, I was in a relationship with the groom, Jake. I loved him. I thought we were building a future together. A future that ended the day I came home to find him with my own sister, the bride. A collective gasp went through the room. It was sharp, audible. My parents' faces went pale. Olivia's jaw dropped, her mask of bridal bliss shattering. But this story isn't just about a simple betrayal, I continued, my gaze locking onto Harold and Eleanor Thornton, who were now leaning forward, their full attention on me. Because the most important truth of all is that this wedding, this beautiful, expensive display, is not about love. It's a business transaction. It's a performance designed to satisfy the moral character clause in a family trust document. It's a desperate, calculated grab for a $50 million inheritance. I let the words hang in the air. The silence was absolute, deafening. You could have heard a pin drop on the plush carpet. "And if any of you doubt my words," I said, pulling my phone from my clutch and holding it up, "I have voice messages from the bride herself, sent just last week, where she brags about her plans to spend that money and mocks me for being left with nothing." That's when all hell broke loose. Harold Thornton, a man who commanded boardrooms, shot to his feet, his face a mask of pure, cold fury. Eleanor looked like she was going to be sick. Without a word, they turned and strode out of the reception hall, their exit as loud as a gunshot in the silence. Olivia let out a shriek, a raw, animal sound of pure rage, and lunged towards me, screaming, "You ruined everything. You ruined my life." Jake, the coward, tried to pull her back, his face as white as a sheet. My parents were frozen in their chairs, their faces a mixture of horror and disbelief. Their perfect party, their perfect image, had just been detonated in front of everyone they knew. And in the back of the room, my cousin Michael stood up, raised his glass, and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "It's about damn time someone told the truth." The aftermath was pure, unadulterated chaos. Guests started grabbing their coats, whispering amongst themselves as they made a hasty exit, eager to escape the carnage and gossip about it later. The beautiful, expensive wedding had devolved into a public spectacle of the highest order. Jake was desperately trying to calm a hysterical, sobbing Olivia, while my parents were frantically trying to do damage control, which was like trying to put out a forest fire with a water pistol. Through it all, I felt nothing but a profound, almost surreal sense of calm. I had said my piece. I had spoken my truth. I didn't need to stay for the fallout. Rachel and Daniel flanked me like a royal guard, and we walked out of that reception hall without a single backward glance. The sound of Olivia's screaming faded behind us, becoming a distant, irrelevant noise. That sound was no longer my problem. On the car ride home, my phone, which I had put on silent, lit up with a text from Michael. The Thorntons just left. I heard Harold on the phone with his lawyer. He said, and I quote, "Cancel everything. He's cut off." You did it, Em. I took a deep, shuddering breath, the first truly free breath I had taken in 3 years. When I got home, I blocked Olivia's number. I blocked Jake's. And then, with a strange sense of finality that felt like closing a heavy book, I blocked my parents. The silence was beautiful. The weeks that followed were a revelation. About a month after the wedding, I received a handwritten letter on thick, elegant stationery. It was from Eleanor Thornton. In it, she thanked me for my courage and my honesty. She apologized profusely for her son's deplorable behavior and for their own ignorance of the situation. She confirmed they had completely disinherited Jake and were in the process of a full financial audit of his expenses over the past 3 years. The most shocking part was the postscript. She asked if I would be willing to meet her for lunch. We met at a quiet, upscale restaurant downtown. She was formidable, intelligent, and surprisingly warm. She told me that my speech was simply the final, irrefutable straw. They had long suspected Jake was reckless and dishonest, but my words, delivered with such quiet conviction, gave them the undeniable proof they needed to act. She also told me, with a sigh, that Jake and Olivia's marriage was already imploding. Without the promise of the Thornton fortune, their soulmate connection had evaporated. They were drowning in debt from the lavish wedding they couldn't afford. The news about their downfall came to me in pieces, mostly from Michael, who seemed to relish his role as the town crier. The sham marriage didn't even last 6 months before the inevitable, messy divorce proceedings began. It turned out Jake hadn't just cheated on me, he'd also been cheating on Olivia with one of her own bridesmaids, Sophia. Apparently, Sophia, racked with guilt after witnessing my speech, had confessed everything to Olivia. They lost the house they had put a down payment on. Jake was fired from the family company. Olivia, stripped of her glamorous, unearned lifestyle, had to get a real job for the first time in her life. My parents, of course, tried to intervene. They showed up at my office, demanding I fix this. They wanted me to go to the Thorntons and tell them I had exaggerated, to plead on Olivia's behalf. I met them one last time at a neutral location, a coffee shop downtown. They didn't apologize. They didn't acknowledge my pain. They just blamed me for the mess, for airing the family's dirty laundry in public. That's when I finally drew the line, for good. My life is not about cleaning up the consequences of Olivia's and Jake's actions, I told them, my voice even unsteady. You never once defended me when I was the one who was hurt. You chose your side 3 years ago. Why should I help her now? I'm done. I stood up, left them sitting there amidst the smell of coffee and their own bitterness, and walked away. I was finally, irrevocably free. My own life, in the meantime, was blossoming. I earned a major promotion at my firm, becoming the new director of creative design, a position I had worked tirelessly for. My friendship with Daniel deepened into a beautiful, supportive relationship built on a foundation of trust and mutual respect. I was happy. Genuinely, peacefully happy, in a way I hadn't realized was possible. The final, incredible chapter of this story came 6 months after the wedding. I received an official letter from the Thornton family's foundation. They had established a new scholarship fund at the local university for promising female architecture students. A fund to help young women build their own futures so they would never have to rely on a man for their security. They had named it the Emma Wilson Grant. Eleanor Thornton called me personally and asked if I would sit on the board of their charitable foundation. My value, the very thing my family had always taken for granted and used against me, was now being celebrated and used to lift others up. Sometimes I stand on the balcony of my new apartment, the one I bought with the bonus from my promotion, and I look out at the city skyline, a skyline I am now helping to shape. I don't feel anger or bitterness anymore. I don't feel the weight of my family's expectations or their disappointment. I learned the hardest lesson of my life, that sometimes the people who are supposed to love you the most are the ones who hold you back. And sometimes, you have to burn the whole bridge down, not to watch it burn, but to use the light from the fire to find your way forward. I accepted the position on the board. I was ready to step into my new life, a life built not on the ashes of my past, but on the solid foundation of my own worth. Thank you all so much for listening to my story. It wasn't easy to share, but I hope it can help someone else out there who feels trapped or undervalued. What's the bravest thing you've ever had to do to stand up for yourself? Let me know in the comments below. And if you found any part of this story helpful, please give it a like and subscribe for more. It really helps the channel. Thanks again.